Rhea County was formed by the General Assembly on December 3, 1807. Rhea County came out of a portion of Roane County. Rhea County was named for the Tennessee politician and Revolutionary War veteran John Rhea. Settlers began moving into this valley once Cherokees gave up claim to it in 1805. Thomas More, Joseph Brooks, and John Henry were the original commissioners appointed to select a suitable place for holding court. They decided upon the home of William Henry, which was located at Big Spring, north of present-day Dayton. The house served as the county courthouse until October 1812. Today, the home place of John Fine sits on this property. The video you are about to view is a historical look back at John and his family's life on this historical piece of property.
Don, from your research and your knowledge of the history of Rhea County, who was the earliest family or the first people to have owned this land?
The first owners of this land was Stokely Donaldson, who was Andrew Jackson's brother-in-law. He acquired this land through a land grant in the early 1800s. Later, the William Henry family acquired this property, and he was one of the founders of Rhea County, one of the organizers. And the seat of the county government was located here on this farm. Courthouse, jail, and all the functions of county government was here.
So what you're saying is even before Old Washington, way before Dayton, this location here was the seat of justice for the county of Rhea.
Yes, I believe in 1807 the county was organized by the state legislature, and then or it was chartered rather, and then they had a commission meeting here in 1808. I believe it was January of 1808. Was the first official county commissioners meeting. They didn't call them county commissioners back then; they called them justices of the peace. But they organized here. The county officials were appointed, and the first jail was organized or was built here. I don't know where on the property it was built, although it was a separate structure from the cabin where the business was conducted.
Is there any artifact or building or anything that still exists from the time period of the Henry family here on this property?
The only artifact that exists is there's a chimney, and the chimney is out back. It's kind of this way from where we're sitting. And I've always been told, and my parents had always been told, that was all that was left of the original cabin. From the way it's structured, the cabin was facing east toward the sun, and that's all that's left. The other reference here, it's not an artifact. They call this area the Big Spring, and there's a lake to the right of me here, and there's depending on how the sun's angled, there's a huge spring down there. And folks came here to get water, and Indians were around here before it was settled, and they got water here. And there was a creek that runs south of here, and part of it's gone. It's got swallowed up by the lake when it was constructed, but it ran into Richland Creek. But it's a huge spring, and it always runs, and it keeps this lake filled up, and it's about 2 acres. So, and on a certain way, again, if you go down there and look at it, there's stacked stone around around the spring, and you can still see that on certain days. If you've got some non-glare glasses, you can look in there and see it. And the water's just emerald colored. You can just walk down the bank and tell where the spring is. But that was part of the reason folks were here, was because there was a readily and huge availability of water, fresh water.
Looking over the property, you mentioned the large pond or lake out there. What about this house that's still standing today? When was it constructed?
Well, I'm not sure. I've always been told it was here when the railroad came through. And the railroad came through in the late 1870s. And I know it's old. It was an old home when we moved here. Bud Ritchie, a wonderful guy. He's probably in his 90s. He used to work for one of the owners here. His name was Cleaver Brown. And Cleaver Brown married my grandfather's sister. So he would have been my great uncle. And Cleaver Brown was an agent for the Southern Railway at that time, is what it's called. And he procured cross ties for the railroad. Folks came here, and he was their agent, and Bud, Mr. Ritchie, worked for him. And Bud told me one time that in the 1930s, he had occasion to be here, and he said it was an old house back then. So it's old, but as to the exact date when it was built, I don't know.
You mentioned Cleaver Brown as one of the previous property owners. Are there any other families that you know of that own this property?
Well, the Henrys, this farm was sold in a court sale to satisfy debts. And so the Henrys moved. I don't remember I'd have to go back and look and see the exact year. But I do know they left here and went to Arkansas, and I don't know what happened to them after that. It moved, it passed hands several times. But when the railroad was built, I believe there was a family here named Kyles, and they lived here. And the railroad bought the right-of-way from them, and I want to think they bought about 1,800 feet of 50 foot or 100 foot. No, maybe it was. I think it's 100 foot right-of-way. Don't hold me to that, but they paid them $900 for it for 1,800 feet, and they were the ones that conveyed it to them. There was Mrs. Kyle passed away here, and her siblings sold it, or in the will they sold it in the 1920s, and that's how Cleaver Brown acquired the property. He moved here in the early 20s. He and my grandfather's sister, who was my aunt. They never had any children, but they lived here. His wife died. I believe she had cancer, and he lived here until the 60s. He died in, I want to think, 1965. He passed away, and then we moved here in 1966.
What did your parents do for a living while they lived here?
Well, when of course, I was 3 years old when we moved here. I don't actually remember moving in the house. I remember being here. My mother, her name is Billy Fine, and her maiden name was Vaughn. And my dad was Edward N. Fine, Ed Fine. And my mother worked in Chattanooga in Turnbull Cone Company. She worked in the office there. And my dad and my uncle, Dan Fine Jr., they had a grocery store. And the grocery store was down here where the Walgreens is today. So when we moved here, my dad had a business, or he was co-owner in the business, and my mother worked in Chattanooga at Turnbull Cone Company.
I assume since you all moved to a farm, you all did quite a bit of farming.
Well, yes. My And I know at certain times he leased this farm and they grew green beans here. And I can remember that. One of my memories about the green beans was down in this field here, there's a power line and the phone line runs through there, and the bean catcher cut the power line. I was just a kid and I remember seeing all the sparks flying. And but they did that a couple of years and sewed it down. And then at some point my dad acquired cattle, and we had cattle here. But there was farms all around here. South of us was Mr. Frank Moore. He had a dairy, and that dairy was where they elects on his day, and it extended across the highway, and he had several acres, and he and Miss Moore, they were just good people. I can remember them growing up. They were great neighbors. And then north of us was the Peavy House farm, and my dad leased it for years, had cattle on it, and then we cropped it some. And then north of us was the dairy, the Owensbys, Charles Owensby, and his son Bill had a dairy up there. And we had great neighbors, and even to this day I have good neighbors. We've been very blessed all years that we've lived here, that we've had great neighbors. And I'd like to sit here and name them all, but I'm afraid I'll leave somebody out by mistake. But I hope I've been as good a neighbor to the neighbors that I've had.
We've heard it already come through this time, or a time, the train. What was it like growing up with a train in your backyard?
Well, you just got used to it. But back then, the train came through about every 3 or 4 hours. And now the trains are about every 20 minutes. And sometimes at night they're about every 18 minutes. They run more trains at night than they do during the day. I've been told, of course, Norfolk Southern leases this railroad back here. They don't own the railroad. Actually, the city of Cincinnati owns the railroad, and they lease it from them. And I've been told it's a huge moneymaker for the city of Cincinnati. But me and some of the neighbors, we used to play on the railroad, and our parents didn't think anything about it. And I wasn't our little kid up there today, but there was only 2 crossings. There was a crossing up at the golf course, which is north of here, and there was a crossing down at Lazy Boy, where you cross, go over into Lazy Boy. And so the train hardly ever blew its whistle. But if it did blow the whistle, somebody had a cow out. And you knew if it was close to you, then my dad a lot of times would get up in the next morning at daylight and have to check fences and look to see. But you knew something was wrong if the train blew a lot. And so that was, but we just didn't think anything about it. And even to this day, it doesn't really bother me. Now, if you're outside, you may have to turn up the volume or be quiet, but it doesn't bother me at all. Just gotten used to it. But I know Dr. Cornelius Bryan College was at a county commission meeting one night, and he was giving a presentation to them, and I had a part to play in it, and he had to stop because the train came through. And when I got up to speak, the train came back through, and I said, it doesn't matter where I go, I can't get away from the train.
Thinking back to your years as a child here, growing up here on this farm, what are some of the most prominent memories that come to mind when you think about this property and growing up here and living here today?
Well, I've lived on this farm all my life. I've not lived in this house all my life, but I've lived here on the farm. Back in the 60s and the 70s, you didn't have near as many distractions. You had 3 channels on the television, and it was we didn't have any close neighbors. So, and being an only child, you had to entertain yourself a lot. So, played outside a lot, stayed outside a lot. And when I got older, my dad was a hunter. He quail hunted, he had bird dogs, and he coon hunted. So guns and hunting were a big part here. So we would rabbit hunt and quail hunt, and there was a lot of quail here back then in this area. Now the quail are just about all gone. The only time I hear a quail is in the spring. You can hear them up and down the railroad. But as far as just getting out and hunting them, I don't even know anybody now that's got bird dogs anymore. But we would rabbit hunt, and that was a big part. Of course, as I got older, I had to help my dad on the farm, and he had a saying. He said, "Well, when I come home, I don't lay on the couch." I mean, and he didn't let me lay on the couch either. You had to be outside, even if you didn't know what to do. You had to be outside. But he gardened and farmed and did that. And my mother, when she would get home, later in life, later on, they had a business over here on the highway, and it was just right straight over here on the highway, about 1,300 feet. Had a furniture store, and my dad had a garage. He was a really good welder, and so my mother ran the furniture store. They sold new furniture. She closed at 5 o'clock. The furniture store closed at 5. She'd come home, cook supper. I hardly ever remember a time that she didn't come home and cook supper. And sometime after 5, my dad would come home and eat, or he'd come home and we'd work outside some and we'd eat supper. But at 6:30, he watched the news, and our living room's in the front of the house, kind of that way, and we had no black and white television. And when you turned it on, this little dot came on, and as it warmed up, the dot got bigger, and it came on. But I always said that when Walter Cronkite came on at 6:30, it was like church in this house. He didn't talk on the phone, didn't talk to anybody, and me and my mother watched the news. And when you turned it off, the little dot would go down. But he watched the news, and if it's in the summer, we'd go back outside and do whatever needed to be done, and come back in. And of course, when the times changed and it got dark in the winter, we were in the house. But a lot of I'm very thankful that I got to grow up on a farm. I think it do youth a lot of good if they all grew up on a farm. But they, my mother, she kept house, and I think about today, about responsibilities. I think about I don't have time, but they ran a business, ran a farm, and kept house, and they had time. It's just different in the late 60s and early 70s. I think there was a lot of good things about that time.
What big events in American history do you remember from your childhood or as a teenager growing up? But what big events do you remember?
Well,
about experiencing.
Of course, when I was born, John F. Kennedy was president. Now, I don't remember President Kennedy, but he was president when I was born. One thing that was going on then, Vietnam. The Vietnam War was going on, and I remember that was on the news every night, and I remember that, that sort of dominated the news. Cold War was going on, but the one thing that stands out, there was a it started to rot. I mean, it started to rot. And I'd go out there and play around that stump. And I had a little hatchet, and I'd mess around with it. And I believe it was in 1969, my grandmother was here keeping me. And my mom and dad was at work. Like I said, they had business over here, and they were open on Saturday. And she hollered at me to come in the house, and the Apollo space program was going on, and it was on television. It was on all 3 channels, and they were orbiting the moon. And she said, "You can come in the house." And she said, "Look, we're going to land on the moon." Of course, it didn't happen right then, but she and I stayed in here a good bit and watched it orbit the moon, and that was a huge event back then. And that dominated the news. Another event that I remember was in 73, I believe. My dad had a bunch of grapes out back, and we were out tending them, picking grapes and stuff, and my grandmother's here. She spent a lot of time here. And, I want to say something about her. Her name was Nail Lawn, and I can sum her up in one word. She was a saint. She was one of the finest women I've ever known. I mean, many days goes by, I don't think about her. But she spent a lot of time here, and she came to the back door, and we were out back here, and she hollered at my dad and said, "Dad, y'all need to come in the house." Well, he didn't know what, he thought something was wrong. And it was in this room, it was actually in this room. And he said, what is something wrong? And she said, "Y'all need to come in here," so President Nixon's going to speak. Well, he had resigned that night, the night before. Of course, we saw that on the news. And so he stopped working, which that was a big deal. And we stayed in here a little while and watched his farewell speech. But I remember that. I just remember that, when the president spoke, everybody stopped what they were doing and listened. And that was a big deal. But there was a lot that went on in the 60s and the 70s. It was a tumultuous time in history. But those are the things I can remember. One thing we were talking, son was talking down one day at the courthouse about old shows, and somebody mentioned Hee Haw. And I said, well, I hated it growing up because I was forced to watch it, but now I kind of like to watch it. So.
Speaking of the courthouse, what led you into public service? What inspired you to run for office and encouraged you to work in public service?
Well, politics were a staple here. My mother and my mom and dad, they were opposites politically. So politics was discussed a lot. Very few times that we didn't eat at the table. So conversations took place at the dinner table. And so, it was talked about a lot, and I got interested, I guess, hearing it for years. And I had my mom and dad, they like I said, they I won't say this about bragging. I'm not bragging, but they were well thought of. They, like I said, they had businesses, and I had a business, and so we had company and visited and all that. And 1984, I went to work in the assessor's office, and Ray Garrison, he was the circuit court clerk, and he'd been circuit court clerk forever, as long as I never remembered anybody but him being in the office. And he retired, and I was approached about several people said, why don't you run? We need a young man. We'd like to see a young man run. And of course, I was 22 at the time. That was a lot of years ago. And so I just threw my hat in the ring, and it went from there. And I was a recipient of grace. People elected me, and so I was a circuit court clerk from 86 to 2003. And then I got elected 5 times, and got appointed to be the clerk of master, which is what I'm doing now in Chancery Court. But my interest in politics was talked about a lot here. I was giving a speech one night, and I said, it was rough growing up in a broken home, because they were constantly going at it about the different sides of politics.
Another interest of yours that I know is the Civil War. What led you into the interest of the American Civil War?
Well, again, my mother was an avid reader, and still is, and I got that from her, to read. And you have to remember, this was the 60s, late the 60s and early 70s. And so I can remember when I was a kid, we would go to the Chickamauga battlefield, and we made several visits there. And we would go to, my dad again, he hunted a lot, and we would go down in South Georgia. We had some friends down there, and I want to talk about them just maybe in a different segment here. But we'd go down there and hunt, and he bird hunted and all that, coon hunted, and so during the day, my mother and I would get out and go out and do things, and the Andersonville historical site was not far from there. That was a prison, and it was about 15 miles from the little town we were at, which was called Elville. And we'd go there and spend the day. And every time we go down there, we'd make a trip over there and see something new. So the war between the states was a big thing. She was interested in it. The other aspect was, Ray County used to have a drive-in, and it opened in the spring, stayed open in the fall till it started getting cool. And for several years, they always opened with Gone with the Wind. And my mother loved Gone with the Wind, so every year we'd go down there and see it. And it was a big part of the family, the Fine family. I've got a double first cousin, Melanie Reynolds, and she was named after one of the characters in the movie, Melanie. So that was talked about. One other thing that kind of piqued, I can remember this. It's funny how you remember some of this stuff, but my dad, my mom ran the furniture store. My dad delivered, and he'd have to go to Chattanooga and buy furniture, new furniture, and haul it up here. So we were either going down or coming back from Chattanooga. And he liked Paul Harvey. He listened to Paul Harvey, and a lot of young folks won't know who Paul Harvey was, but he was a radio commentator. And I always said there was 2 voices that if you heard them, you knew who they were, and that was Paul Harvey and Casey Kasem. If you heard their voices, you automatically knew who they were. But Paul Harvey was telling a story about George Washington, and he said at the end of the story, I don't remember the content, but he said George Washington was truly the greatest American. And so my dad looked over there, he was driving, he said, well, do you know who the second greatest American was? And I said, no. He said, Robert E. Lee. So I wanted to know about these guys and study about them, and that kind of piqued my interest in them. And then in I don't remember them buying them, but they bought a set of world books. They were purchased in 1967. Of course, I'd been 4 years old at the time. But later in life, we had them, and my mother liked to read them, look at them, and I would get them out and just didn't matter what it was, and look at them and read, and because you didn't have a lot of entertainment, you either read or if it was couldn't go outside, you were inside, and you had to. So reading got to be entertainment, and my mother encouraged that, and she'd buy books and things that piqued my interest. History being one of them. I can't really tell you what got my interest in history, but I just picked up the knack for it, and I liked it, and I love to read about it, and I love to do it, I love to go visit the sites, and geography. History and geography was something that I excelled at, and I still like to study about it.
John, thinking about all the way back to the Henrys, to the Stokely Donaldson, through the centuries of time, from the time when your family first moved here, growing up here, it's all a part of your history. Why do you think history is so important today?
Well, I think about the introduction they used to have on the Biography Channel. Everybody has a story. Every inhabitant of this planet has a story, and those stories need to be told. History's not just what's written down black and white. It's our experiences, and we learn from it. That's the whole point of history to me. You learn from the mistakes of the past so you don't repeat them. And I think that's why history is so important. We don't emphasize history enough in this country, not just in education, but we don't emphasize it enough to our children. And that's one reason I think we're having all of this trouble we're having today. This is the greatest country that's ever been on the face of this planet, but it's being slowly ripped apart by wanting to change the past to try to correct conditions today. And I see these young people out in these big cities destroying monuments, destroying property, and I can tell you they've never had it so good. And the history they're attacking is not the cause of some of the problems. All history, good or bad, should be remembered. And I think that we learn from it. We honor bravery of people. I get asked a lot, who do I think were the best presidents? And I have an opinion about who were great presidents. But I don't know any president that didn't make some mistakes. And so you have to judge people whether they were in the Confederate Army, or whether they were in the Union Army, or whether they were in the United States Marine Corps in World War II. You have to judge people by their whole life, not pick and choose certain aspects, because I don't know, there's only one person that was perfect. And so we have to understand that history is just as important as mathematics or computer science or English. I didn't think English was very important when I was in high school, and I've kind of proven this country was founded by men who were literally geniuses, but even they didn't agree. And we would do well to learn from them and to learn from the great men of history, and not try to erase it or tear it down or rewrite it. Yes, I think there's things we can learn about, and some things come to light, but to say that we're going to just completely erase and do away is a huge crime. And I know I kind of went on and on here about this, but history is just as important in knowing where we came from as to where we're going. George Washington gave us a warning way back when this republic was founded. And that's another thing about history. We hear a lot about democracy in this country. And yes, it is somewhat of a democracy, but officially it's a republic. And that's what we live in. And he said there were three things that would destroy a country. One was spending more money than you have, partisan politics, and foreign entanglements. And, that's kind of where we're at today. And Robert E. Lee said a country that doesn't honor its past has no future. And so and I've quoted Lee and Washington a lot, but they were great men, and they were honorable men. And there's a multitude of honorable, good people that's been a part of this country, and women, men and women, that have struggled and made this what it is today. And I'm just flabbergasted. I never thought I would live long enough to see the things that I see today. But it all goes back to what's not taught in the home, and the importance of why history is important. And I could go on and on about it, but it is just, it's so important. And I think I'm so thankful that I was encouraged to read and understand and look into the thing. I want to mention one other thing about politics. Even though my mom and dad were members of the opposite party, they both took pride in being independent. In other words, and it's like my dad told me one time, he said, don't leave your brain outside the voting booth. And what he was telling me was, you vote for the best person, and the person that's going to do the right thing, not necessarily a party label. And I think we need to get back to that. We need to search out and get the best people who are qualified for office, and not vote just because they're a member of a certain political party. George Washington warned us about that, and I think I'd rather follow his advice as some of the folks we have today in high office, not necessarily the highest office, but some of the folks I see on the news. And I go back to Cronkite. It wasn't just Cronkite, there were other newscasters. You could really believe anything they said, and you could take it to the bank. And nowadays, you have to watch. I have trouble believing any of them today in the news, because it's more commentary than the straight news. And I'll make up my own mind about what's right, what I hear, or my opinions rather. I'll make up my own mind about that. But I think journalism needs to take a step back and say, hey, we need to be reporting facts here, and not 30-second sound bites. And so anyway, I went off a little bit on a tangent there, but I think we all need to do what's right for the nation, and not necessarily doing what's best for personal or private interests. Before we go into the next room, I wanted to say something about this fireplace mount. This is the same identical woodwork that's in the Magnolia House down in South Dayton. And I don't know who did it. It was here when we moved here, but it's very old. And but it's identical to what's in the Magnolia house.
I noticed this picture on the wall. Is there any significance to this picture?
Well, yes. This is General Patrick Cleaver, and he's one of my favorite generals. He was an Irishman, and he immigrated to America in mid-1800s. He had volunteered, went into the British Army, I want to say at 14 or 15 years old, and he did 6 or 8 years. He did a long-term service, and came to America. And he had studied to be a pharmacist, and he studied to be a doctor. And he got over here, and he decided to be a lawyer. And he settled in Helena, Arkansas. And so when the war started, he volunteered, went in the Confederate Army, and he was an amazing guy. A lot of stories about him, and I could talk about him all day, but one of the stories that he wrote a letter. He got engaged, I believe, in 1864 to a lady, but he was real close to his brother, and he wrote his brother a lot of letters, and he wrote his brother a letter about why it was so important that the cause they were fighting for to be preserved, and they had to prevail. And I can't quote it verbatim, but he said, if we lose this war, he turned out to be a prophet. He said, if we lose the war, he said, our brave soldiers in this struggle will be held in derision, and these brave men, their reputations will be tarnished. And he went on and on about it, and he said that's why it was important to win. He was very dedicated to the South. He was actually did something revolutionary. He was for emancipation, and he was what I would call a thinker outside the box. And he wanted to emancipate African Americans. He wanted to have them fight in the Confederate Army. And later in the war, Robert E. Lee adopted his idea, but the war didn't have long to go. But my favorite quote about him was he was such an inspirer of men. He was a brave soldier. He was just a brilliant commander. But there was an old sergeant major that had been with him, been from the war from the start. And after the war, they asked him what it was like to serve under him. And he looked at the reporter, and he said, when General Cleaver was on the field, you were afraid to be afraid.
Wow.
And he had a huge story, and not a lot of books about him. He was called the Stonewall Jackson of the West. But he was just one of my favorite generals, and I've always admired him. And so I wanted a picture of him, and there it is. So I'm glad to have him in the chimney that we talked about earlier, that I've always been told was part of the old cabin that was here when the county was founded. And the base is original. This looks original. Now the top part is old block. That was modern. When we moved here, it was not in use. I don't know what's on the other side is the kitchen. So I don't know that this had any function with this house, but it certainly did with what was here before then. But we're making an effort, the Historical Society and myself, to preserve this chimney and to make sure that it's preserved, and hopefully there'll be a monument set up with this chimney incorporated.
I noticed this big stump here. It looked like it was quite a large tree at one point. How old do you think the tree is, and is there anything you remember about this tree being?
Well, when we moved here, there was a big walnut tree here, and it was a huge tree back then. And there was a companion tree out in the front, and lightning struck it many years ago, and it's been removed. This tree got so big that I had concerns it was going to fall on my house. And and this was the room we were in when we were doing the earlier interview. So a friend of mine was leasing the farm, Bobby Michael. And Bobby had a guy working for him that worked at Lazy Boy. He worked for Bobby in the afternoon. He worked at Lazy Boy during the day. And Lazy Boy had a project. I didn't know about it. He pointed out that they wanted a big walnut tree to make some commemorative furniture, and they wanted it to come from Rhea County. So it all intersected, and I donated the tree to Lazy Boy, and they came up here and cut it, and they made some commemorative furniture out of it. So that's why the stump's here. That was about 3 or 4 years ago. So and the ivy is growing on it, so hopefully it'll take it. But that tree was huge. I asked when they cut it how old they thought it was, and they thought it was over 150 years old. Wow. So it was an old tree. Yeah. I've seen the furniture, and Lazy Boy was good enough to put that it came from the fine farm, and but that's what happened to it. But it was beautiful wood. It was beautiful walnut. But I don't. Like I said, that tree was old when I was a kid, so it was an old tree. I wanted to point out something while we were outside here walking around. I had mentioned about taking trips when I was a kid, going to South Georgia with my dad. My mom and dad going down there when he'd take hunting trips. This tree is a pecan tree, and that tree over there is a pecan tree, and they were the same. They were set out at the same time, and it was back in the 60s, probably in the 67. My dad bought 2 pecan trees down there and hauled them back up here from South Georgia, from Ellisville, Georgia, and he set these out. So these trees have been here since about 1967, and I'm reminded when I see these trees of the connection that my family had with some wonderful people down in Ellisville, Georgia, the Snyder family, and the Kirby family, the Jordan family, and Mark Murphy and his family. They came here and visited us, and we'd go visit them, and they were just good Southern people. And I want to say that my life and my family's life is a lot richer because we got to know those folks, and we spent a lot of time in their town, and they spent time up here, and these trees always remind me of that relationship and those good folks down there, and very grateful that we got to know them, and they hunted with my dad and socialized with my mother, and we had a lot of good friends down there, and still do. And but these trees, that's where they came from, and they've been here. They never produced any pecans. We never harvested any pecans, but they provide a lot of good shade over the years. Yep. I mentioned earlier about playing out here around a maple tree, and it was right in this vicinity right here. There was a stump, and I'd get out here and play around it, and I had a little hatchet. And I was playing out here one day, and I hit something, and I dug it out, and it was this airhead. And it's just a pristine airhead, and I didn't chip it. I don't know how I kept from chipping it, but it was buried up in that stump, and that stump was, I couldn't wrap my arms around it today. So there's no telling when this firehead got into that stump. Yeah. But that's it, but it was right here. So I found several airheads around here. I again, to have something to do to play, I'd play up and down that creek bank, and I found several airheads up and down that creek bank. Oh wow! So there was at some point. I don't know that there was a village or never seen any Indian mounds or anything like that here, but they were definitely in this area.
John, thank you so much for having us out here today. This is going to make an incredible oral history, and it definitely reminds us of the significance that this piece of property has in Rhea County's history as well as in your family. From what I understand, the city plans to buy this piece of property. How do you feel about the city pursuing that?
Well, yes, the city is going to buy the property, and as I've said, this is the only place I've ever really known, and a lot of great memories here. My mom and dad, I wouldn't know where to begin to talk about how lucky I was and am to have parents like that I've had. I think about Gun Barrel, and I'm glad that 100,000 years ago, God saw fit to let me have the parents that I had. My dad, of course, my mother's still alive, and not only that, but my extended family. A lot of uncles and cousins, and have just been. I've been very, very fortunate. I don't know what the city of Dayton, what they plan to do here. I do know they've said that they're going to tear the house down. I don't know what their use of this property is, but the life I've had here that I've known is over. And looking this way, growing up here, and even in the last, several years ago, I could get my shotgun or my rifle, and I could walk all the way to the golf course and come back. And all the farms over on the other side of the railroad and up north of me were just like it was when I was a boy. But that's all gone now. And as I said, the life I've had here is over. I hope, if I'm asked for any suggestions, I hope that the city would entertain maybe making a park here. But of course, it'll be entirely up to them. They'll be the owners. But I will always be thankful that I was allowed to live here and grew up here, and it's been a difficult decision. But as I say, the landscape and the topography and everything here has changed, and it's forever changed. So it's but again, thanks to the Historical Society and yourself and Dean Wilson coming up here and doing this, hopefully this will be preserved for future generations, and that's my hope.